Senator Gillibrand. We're doing by, if you want to defer to Senator Kelly, be happy to, but we are doing by seniority.
Mr. Chairman, in New York's capital region, the Albany Nanotech Complex is set to house some of our nation's most advanced electronics research, development, and manufacturing in particular fields like wafer processing, manufacturing, and lithography tools. Today's annual threat assessment points out that China currently lags behind the U.S. in developing the most advanced chips, giving them cause to steal our technology, which we've seen them do over and over. I included legislation in last year's NDAA requiring DoD to establish a pilot program to enable collaboration between the NSA's Cybersecurity Collaboration Center and the U.S. semiconductor manufacturers to improve the cybersecurity and semiconductor design and manufacturing process. General Hawk, how is the NSA working with the FBI to create safeguards against espionage and cyber attacks at leading public research facilities and at semiconductor manufacturers?
Senator, thank you for the question. So in terms of how we think about the China cyber threat, it is clear that they are going to be relentless to intend to steal intellectual property. And so from our perspective, part of what NSA is really focused on doing is illuminating that threat. So we have done a series of unclassified advisories with a number of partners, elements across U.S. government, 6 other nations, multiple companies, to illuminate that threat in a way that allows us to get now unity of action against that threat. Unclassified reports to allow increased unity of action. So from the FBI's perspective, they're a teammate in everything that we do that talks about the cyber threat within the United States. And from a specific look at semiconductors, critical technology that clearly China wants to catch up on. And from our perspective, an area that we will continue to identify those threats and communicate those both through the FBI and then through unclassified advisories wherever we can.
Director Wray.
I would just agree with everything General Hawk just said. I would just add to that, we have set up counterintelligence task forces in all 56 field offices, including in the Albany area, and NSA is a key participant with us in our national effort in that regard. And in addition to the unclassified information that can be shared through the good work that we do together, one of the advantages to the FBI engaging with private companies is because we get information from so many different sources. There are times when we can share information with a private sector entity in a way that helps protect NSA's sources and methods, just because that doesn't clearly get identified as this is something NSA told us.
Research from the Center for Countering Digital Hate found that the leading AI image generators create election disinformation in 41% of cases in which they are prompted, including images that could support false claims about candidates or election fraud in spite of controls we've been told have been put in place. This is for the entire panel. Have any of you seen foreign adversaries with intent to use generative AI, either images, videos, audio, to deceive American voters? What are we relying on to advise the public when this inauthentic content appears? Director Wray, you can start.
Well, I want to think about what I could say here. I mean, certainly AI is something that all of our most significant adversaries are taking a hard look at to enhance their efforts. We have seen AI used in a variety of settings, whether it's been used specifically to target voters. I'm not sure that I could say that, but we are actively concerned about that as the latest wrinkle in a long-standing effort to engage in information warfare.
Director Burns.
Yeah, I mean, another example is we've seen evidence that Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula has used AI to generate videos aimed at inspiring lone wolf attacks as a result of the Gaza conflict as well.
Director Haynes.
I think another example is Russia deploying AI tools in the context of their influence efforts in Ukraine. And there we've seen, for example, I think it was in March 2022, there was a deep fake of the Ukrainian president, Zelensky, asking Ukrainians to lay down their arms, and ultimately had to be actually countered by President Zelensky in order to address it.
Did we give them the information or capability to do that quickly?
The Ukrainians? Yes, we worked with them on that.
General Hawk.
So in terms of how we're thinking about AI security, NSA established an AI security center. Part of that is to be able to generate and communicate to anyone that is building a model in the United States from an AI perspective, what are those threats? And what are the security mechanisms to ensure that to avoid misuse of those models? We're also using the AI Security Center for how we apply all of the ethical and safety standards of how the department will leverage AI. But really, the last component would be, how do we communicate to those companies the threats that they will have of their technology and how it will be employed?
So, go ahead.
Sure, Senator, quickly, you're right to raise this as a threat, and I think our view of it is that tools like generative AI will essentially lower the barrier for actors, state and non-state, with fewer resources to engage in potential election interference.
And General Kraus?
From a DIA perspective, I don't think I would add anything to what has been covered here other than the counterintelligence portion of that has a touch point across everything that's already been mentioned.
I would indicate, Senator Gentleman, at the Munich Security Conference, something I participated in, there were 20 tech companies that came together, most of the social media companies, on a voluntary basis to indicate both watermarking and willingness to take down AI-generated video and voice that were affecting elections, but it was voluntary, and the proof will be in the pudding.
And just for the record, no one said they have a plan to tell the American people or to advise the American people.
This committee will be having public hearings on this subject very shortly that Senator Rubio and I have agreed upon. Senator Rounds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, thank you to all of you for your service and to your teams as well. Director Wray, with regard to the PRC and some recent public reports of significant ag land purchases, if these land purchases are accurate, they may very well pose a threat to not only some military installations, but most certainly involved in food production that takes away from our ability to produce for our own country as well. But just curious about whether or not you are aware or could confirm land purchases by Chinese nationalists within the United States, and are you following them at this time?
So this is an issue that we're focused on a lot lately. I think what I would say is we're investigating a number of instances proactively where we're seeing either commercial real estate or land being purchased by those with ties to the PRC near critical infrastructure. And I want to be clear, of course, foreign purchase of land, including Chinese purchase of land, is not itself inherently illegal. The problem is the risk, and as has been discussed much here already in a different context, the hold that the Chinese government and the CCP have over its businesses in particular. And so we're particularly concerned about situations where a purchase of land near a military installation, critical infrastructure, something like that, could be leveraged to enable anything from espionage, data collection, or worse.
Do you know if the tools that we have in place today are strong enough or capable of stopping these purchases from moving forward?
Well, I mean, certainly a lot of types of transactions, go through the CFIUS process, but I'm not clear on whether or not that fully extends to all the kind of land purchase situations that we're concerned about. We are working with, through the CFIUS process. When that applies, we're working with the USDA to try to work towards maybe some kind of mandatory reporting regime, that might apply. So I think there is room for plugging gaps that may exist.
Thank you. I'd like to also ask it with regard to AI in particular. Look, bottom line is it's not going away. It's something that we're going to have to deal with. Right now, it appears as though we lead the world in regard to AI capabilities. But most certainly, our near-peer adversaries recognize that, and they're going to do whatever they can as a shortcut to our capabilities, air, land, sea, space, and cyberspace. with regard to the advances with AI right now, I'm concerned as much about China and Russia and their capability to use AI to develop weapon systems that we have never really thought about as being in the forefront of a major and direct threat to the United States. And I'm going to talk about biologics in particular. We know that China and Russia have significant capabilities with regard to AI, and that using AI, you can make rapid advances, as you've noted on pages 30 through 33 in your report, that with AI, you can very rapidly develop your biologics. I'm concerned about the fact that it may very well be used as a weapon system. I'm not sure who to direct this to, but I'll start with Director Wray, and if you'd like to pass this on, that's fine. But it seems to me that this is an area that if we're not ahead in time to be able to identify and stop them, that this is probably as much of a threat to the United States as any other realm that we've got today.
Well, I'll start, and others may want to chime in more from a military perspective. But what I would say is that from an FBI perspective, one of our priorities is protecting American AI innovation from theft, especially from the Chinese. America leads the world in AI innovation, and AI is often, to Senator Gillibrand's question, for example, about detecting deep fakes, and one of the best weapons against AI is better AI. And so we need to protect that innovation, and we're keenly concerned that the Chinese, which have, as I've testified repeatedly, a bigger hacking program than every other major nation combined, if they steal our AI to power it, it makes words like force multiplier sound like an understatement.
And may I just, in one last thought, just on page 32 of your report, you make it clear that Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea probably maintain the capability to produce and use pathogens and toxins, and China and Russia have proven adept at manipulating the information space to reduce trust and confidence in countermeasures and U.S. biotechnology and research. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Ossoff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to our panel. Director Wray, I believe you noted this earlier, but do you share my view that the threat of terrorism associated with unlawful entry through the southern border poses a serious threat to U.S. national security?
Yes, I've testified repeatedly that we are concerned about the terrorism implications from potential targeting of vulnerabilities at the border.
How would you assess the present level of threat and risk of a terrorist attack in the United States compared to past periods during your tenure?
Well, even before October 7th, I would have told this committee that we were at a heightened threat level from a terrorism perspective, in the sense that it's the first time I've seen in a long, long time the threats from homegrown violent extremists, that is jihadist-inspired extremists, domestic violent extremists, foreign terrorist organizations, and state-sponsored terrorist organizations all being elevated at one time. Since October 7th, though, that threat has gone to a whole nother level. And so this is a time, I think, for much greater vigilance than has maybe been called upon of us before October 7th.
Is the FBI postured to understand the extent of the terrorist threat associated with the southern border? We've been briefed on some specific threats. Do you feel that you know enough to assure us that the FBI is as well across it as you can be, or do you need more resources? Or do you feel you're flying blind and not able to define the potential scope and extent of the threat?
I think we are working very hard with our partners, but there's no question that we need more resources to combat the threat. I'll just give a concrete example. Through working with DHS, they collect DNA samples, and we provide kits to DHS to collect DNA samples from the people coming across the border that then get sent to the FBI lab. That's part of why we asked for a significant enhancement, because of the sheer increase in people coming across means a sheer increase in the number of samples that need to be collected. That's what helps us identify those people if they're then committing crimes somewhere in the United States, or, as happens all too often, unfortunately, they go back across the border and try to illegally re-enter again. So we need to be able to process those samples quickly. There's a backlog. We asked in the 24 budget for enhancement. Not only did we not get an enhancement, there was a 10% cut to the terrorist screening center. So whatever happened in 24 happened in 24, but I would urge Congress as we look at fiscal year 25 that we can't double down on those cuts if we're going to be serious about protecting the border.
Well, speaking of Congress, I think it's worth noting that a serious, tough, bipartisan border security measure was put forward in the Congress, in fact, co-authored by a conservative Republican member of this committee, which would have surged enforcement resources to the border, which would have provided substantial resources to fight cartels and to crack down on fentanyl trafficking, which would have tightened asylum standards and expedited adjudication and therefore removal timelines for those who were trying to enter the country without a valid reason to. Former president put out the word that he wanted the bill stopped for political reasons, and the bill was stopped. In fact, not only was the bill stopped in the Senate, it was denied even a debate on the Senate floor. And this speaks to the corrosive impact of extreme partisanship and polarization in this country on our national security. So I'd like to ask you, Director Haynes, how do our adversaries view the impact of political extremism and polarization and partisanship on America's strength and stability? We're talking about worldwide threats. Those threats can exploit our own frailties here at home.
I think the best way I can answer that question is to point to the fact that we've seen that both Russia and China, for example, have taken the opportunity to highlight where there's political dysfunction or other issues that they see in the context of our governance and use it as part of their information operations globally, both to sort of highlight, for example, to their own populations that, you know, democracy is quite challenging and would you really want this at home kind of thing, and also to demonstrate to our allies and partners that maybe we can't be relied on as effectively.
Thank you, Director Haynes. Thank you all for your testimony.
Senator Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, everyone, for being here today. I've been sitting here since 2:30. There's often maybe an advantage for going last in one of these hearings. I was going to say it was the elephant in the room until my colleague from Georgia brought it up. But as I've sat here, I've heard most members of this committee ask something about the southern border. Not everybody, but the majority. I spent a lot of time on the border, perhaps more time than maybe anybody on this committee, maybe with the exception of Senator Cornyn, who I've traveled to the border with. And I strongly agree with what most of my Democrat and Republican colleagues have said about the problems and the challenges. You know, fentanyl coming north, precursors often from China heading south, violent extremist organizations, Chinese migrants who might be in, you know, Maine, selling rather strong marijuana, ISIS, Iran proxies, problems in Mexico. I mean, over and over again, they've pointed out all these problems. And I've worked on this issue, providing more pay for Border Patrol, closing gaps in border wall along the southern border, you know, where they make sense, and they certainly do in a lot of places. More money for NGOs to help Border Patrol. Director Wray pointed out, talking about how we need more resources to combat the threat. And it helps when DHS gets those resources. And we had the opportunity to do something about it. We really did. More money for technology, including fentanyl detection. More Border Patrol agents, more asylum officers, more authorities to rapidly expel individuals. A change in the credible fear standard. More money for detention facilities. More visas to reunite families. And all this legislation was endorsed by the Border Patrol Union. And it had strong bipartisan support. Until it didn't. And my colleague from Georgia points out why it didn't. Director Wray, is it in your assessment that more resources and stronger policy that could help your partners, not necessarily the FBI, but DHS, is that your assessment that that would help deal with all these things that were mentioned in this committee hearing today?
Well, I'll leave it to others to speak to policies, but certainly in terms of resources, not just for DHS, but for the FBI, we need more resources to deal with all the threats that emanate from the border that we're responsible for.
Director Haynes?
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that.
Director Burns?
Nope, I don't have anything to add. I agree.
All right, well, I'm going to yield back the remainder of my time because I think it's, you know, the failure of that legislation, that alone presents a national security threat to this country, in my view. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you. Let me thank my members. And let me also just say for a moment, we have strong views on this committee. But one of the things I think that we have always taken some pride is that we can agree without questioning each other's patriotisms, without questioning each other's motives. And I hope that tenor will be maintained. Members on this side feel very strong. I felt very strong on the border bill. Members on the other side raise legitimate questions about the border as well. I do hope, particularly as we deal with our intelligence professionals, the one thing we've tried to have this committee always do, and I frankly, I learned from people like Richard Burr and Dianne Feinstein and Zachary Chambliss, is that disagreement, at least in terms of the Intelligence Committee, should not go in terms of ad hominem attacks. I don't think I heard that. I heard huge policy differences. We ought to have those. But the one thing I hope and pray is that we maintain this notion, because the intelligence professionals who never get the recognition they need look to this committee to be, I hope, an island of sanity in an otherwise sometimes challenging political environment. That doesn't take away anybody's views, doesn't take away anybody's right to have those views, but I have enormous respect for every member of this committee, regardless of which side of the aisle they sit on, and we're going to go at it time and again, but I hope we owe our intelligence professionals that that kind of notion that just because we're on different political sides of the aisle, that neither political party has a monopoly on truth or patriotism, and we can have differences of opinion without questioning each other's truth or patriotism. And with that,
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to claim my time, please. Well, Mr. Chairman, first of all, I can't let this go, the last two speakers on the Democratic side, without responding. Look, this committee, I've been on this for 15 years, and we do a really good job until politics do creep in. And that's what's happened here this afternoon with the last two speakers. These are the facts. The last president of the United States closed the border. He closed the border down to almost zero crossings by the time he left office. He did it even though he was sued over and over and over again by people from the other side of the aisle. But he shut it down, and he shut it down under the law that's in effect today. Congress has done its job. It passed a law saying you cannot enter the United States without authorization. That's the law today. When the current president came in, we all know he took the policies of the former president, tore them up, and rescinded them, and now we have what we have. As far as the bill that's concerned, everybody's talking about the former president making phone calls. He never called me. But I can tell you this, I will not vote for any bill that allows any illegals to cross into this country, and everybody here knows that bill would have allowed 5,000 a day to come into this country. That's not for me. And I don't care if the president calls me or doesn't call me. I'm not, my red line is not one. What we need to do is enforce the laws that we have. You want to talk about the front door and how we let them in the front door? I'm all in. But the back door's got to get closed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
and I would simply add that the former president and a number of my Republican colleagues had repeatedly said, to make the kind of changes you need permanently on the border, you need legislation. And that is an ongoing debate. It's a debate that we'll have here and elsewhere. And what we need, and the thing that the most important last comment I'll make, because we will be breaking and going into closed session, is we need an intelligence community that's going to never be afraid to tell truth to power. And truth to power sometimes means telling us on both sides of the aisle what we don't necessarily want to hear. I think you, the witnesses, and frankly, the men and women, literally thousands of them who you represent, do that on a regular basis. And at the end of the day, while we may hassle and haggle over some of these policy things. The most important thing you've got to do is keep speaking that truth to power, even when we don't want to hear. We are adjourned until we move into the classified setting.